The world woke up to a geopolitical shock when news broke that the United States had launched a large-scale military operation inside Venezuela, resulting in the capture of President Nicolás Maduro and his wife. The operation, carried out in the early hours of the morning, immediately altered the global balance of power in the Western Hemisphere and reignited long-standing debates about sovereignty, regime change, and the limits of American presidential authority. According to statements from Washington, the operation was swift, decisive, and deliberately targeted. Elite U.S. forces struck key locations, including Venezuela's largest military complex, before extracting Maduro and transporting him out of the country. Within hours, he was no longer in Caracas, but in U.S. custody, facing federal charges tied to narcotics trafficking and alleged collaboration with criminal organizations that the United States designates as terrorist groups. Maduro has long denied these accusations, but the legal machinery that had been dormant for years was suddenly activated in dramatic fashion. President Trump appeared before the press shortly after the operation and delivered remarks that instantly reverberated across the globe. He confirmed that Maduro had been captured and flown out of Venezuela and declared that the United States would temporarily oversee the country's administration during what he described as a transitional period. He emphasized oil production repeatedly, framing Venezuela's vast energy reserves as both mismanaged and strategically vital. The message was unmistakable. This was not just an arrest. It was a direct intervention into the political and economic future of a sovereign state. Images emerging from Caracas told their own story. Burned-out vehicles, damaged structures, and fires near major military installations painted a picture of a country that had just experienced a sudden and overwhelming use of force. For Venezuelans, already battered by years of economic hardship, sanctions, and political instability, the uncertainty deepened overnight. For the rest of the world, the question was not simply what had happened, but what would happen next. Reactions poured in almost immediately. Allies and adversaries alike weighed in, each interpreting the operation through their own strategic lens. Israel's prime minister publicly praised the United States, framing the action as a bold step toward restoring freedom and justice in the region. He applauded the decisiveness of American leadership and the effectiveness of its military, casting the capture of Maduro as a moral victory against authoritarianism. From a very different perspective, the Vatican urged restraint. Pope Leo XIV expressed deep concern for the Venezuelan people, emphasizing that their welfare should come before all other considerations. He called for respect for sovereignty, constitutional order, and human rights, and warned against the normalization of violence as a political tool. His remarks underscored a growing unease among religious and humanitarian voices who feared that the removal of a leader by force could plunge an already fragile society into deeper chaos. Global powers were far less subtle in their condemnation. China demanded the immediate release of Maduro and denounced the operation as a clear violation of international law. Beijing framed the strike as an example of American disregard for sovereignty and warned of dangerous precedents. North Korea echoed similar sentiments, calling the operation a serious encroachment and using it as further justification for its own security posture. For regimes that already view Washington with suspicion, the raid reinforced long-held narratives of U.S. interventionism. Inside the United States, the response was deeply divided. Critics across the political spectrum questioned the legality of the operation and the absence of congressional authorization. Former Vice President Kamala Harris labeled the raid unlawful and unwise, arguing that it made America neither safer nor stronger. She warned that regime change efforts, particularly those entangled with oil interests, have a long history of producing instability and blowback rather than lasting security. Her criticism tapped into a broader anxiety among Americans, weary of foreign entanglements and skeptical of justifications that shift with the political winds. Supporters of the administration, however, framed the operation as overdue accountability. They pointed to Maduro's indictments and argued that no leader should be immune from justice simply because they control a state apparatus. Some administration officials described the military action as support for a law enforcement function, asserting that U.S. personnel were acting to execute arrest warrants and protect themselves in the process. This framing attempted to blur the line between policing and warfare, though it raised as many questions as it answered. At the heart of the controversy lies a fundamental issue. Under what authority can the United States use military force on foreign soil to remove a sitting head of state? Past administrations have wrestled with this question, often stretching existing legal frameworks to justify actions that Congress never explicitly authorized. Comparisons quickly surfaced to historical precedents, most notably the 1989 operation in Panama that led to the capture of Manuel Noriega. Like Maduro, Noriega faced U.S. drug trafficking charges, and like Venezuela today, Panama then was subjected to a military intervention justified through a contested interpretation of presidential power. That precedent remains controversial decades later, and its shadow looms large over the current situation. Venezuela is far larger, more populous, and more strategically complex than Panama was. It possesses vast natural resources, particularly oil, that attract global interest. Any attempt by the United States to run the country, even temporarily, risks entangling Washington in a prolonged and costly commitment with unpredictable consequences. The administration's messaging has only added to the uncertainty. Over recent months, the justifications for action against Venezuela appeared to shift repeatedly. At various points, officials emphasized drug trafficking, migration, national security threats, and economic interests. Now, with Maduro in custody, the focus has turned openly toward oil infrastructure and governance. Such shifting narratives have fueled skepticism, even among lawmakers who are otherwise sympathetic to a hardline approach. Meanwhile, practical realities on the ground are impossible to ignore. Removing a leader does not automatically stabilize a nation. Power vacuums invite internal sancourage, factional struggles, and external interference. Venezuela's political landscape is deeply polarized, and Maduro's removal may embolden rival groups while provoking loyalist resistance. The risk of prolonged unrest is real, particularly if Venezuelans perceive the intervention as foreign occupation rather than liberation. Complicating matters further is the administration's suggestion that this operation may not be an isolated case. In interviews and public remarks, President Trump hinted at additional military options elsewhere, signaling a willingness to extend this assertive approach beyond Venezuela. Though no specific country was formally named, the implication was clear. The United States is prepared to use force to pursue leaders it deems criminal or threatening, regardless of borders. This prospect has alarmed diplomats and defense analysts alike. Another operation in a different country would further test international norms and strain alliances. It would also raise serious questions about escalation. Each intervention increases the likelihood of retaliation, miscalculation, or proxy conflicts involving other major powers. The global order, already under stress, could fracture further if unilateral military actions become a recurring tool of policy. Domestically, the political ramifications are just beginning to unfold. Congress faces mounting pressure to reassert its constitutional role in authorizing military force. Legal scholars are debating whether existing interpretations of presidential authority can withstand scrutiny if challenged in court. Public opinion remains volatile, shaped by memories of past interventions that promised quick victories but delivered long wars. There are also economic dimensions to consider. Energy markets reacted nervously to the news, weighing the possibility of increased oil production against the risks of instability. Companies and investors are watching closely, aware that political uncertainty can disrupt supply chains as easily as it can create opportunity. For Venezuela's population, the stakes are even higher. Years of hardship have eroded trust in institutions, and the sudden imposition of foreign oversight may deepen feelings of disenfranchisement rather than restore confidence. Humanitarian concerns loom large as well. Any sustained military presence or administrative takeover risks, exacerbating shortages of food, medicine, and basic services. International aid organizations are urging all parties to prioritize civilian welfare and avoid actions that could worsen an already dire situation. The Pope's call for peace and justice reflects a broader moral appeal that transcends politics, emphasizing human dignity amid power struggles. As the dust settles from the initial operation, one reality is clear. The capture of Nicolás Maduro marks a dramatic escalation in U.S. foreign policy, one that blurs the boundaries between law enforcement, military action, and regime change. It has reshaped Venezuela's future in an instant and sent shockwaves through the international system. Whether this move will be remembered as a decisive step towards stability or as the opening chapter of a deeper crisis remains uncertain. Much depends on what follows. How long will the United States remain involved? What framework will govern Venezuela during this transitional period? And perhaps most critically, will this approach be repeated elsewhere? The answers to these questions will define not only the fate of Venezuela, but also the trajectory of American power in a world increasingly resistant to unilateral force. For now, the world watches, wary and alert, as the consequences of this extraordinary operation continue to unfold.